Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Cormor Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap, Season 2, Episode 15, titled Her Charm. The episode's description reads as follows. As an FBI agent, Sam has to protect a female witness when the people after her seem to know his every step. This episode was directed by Christopher T. Welch. This is his first episode of the series. He did 3 others, most of which are this season, and a Season 3 episode. In addition to that, he also directed 1 episode of Moonlighting, 8 episodes of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, the series, and 7 episodes of The Secret World of Alec Mack. Most of his career seems to be in the sound department, where he has 145 credits, and is still working in that department to this day. The episode was written by Donald P. Belzerio and Deborah Pratt. It takes place on September 26, 1973, and originally aired on February 7th, 1990. This is the first episode of Quantum Leap that I am taking a look at in the new year. Before going any further, I will tell you a couple of things. 1, this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't yet watched the episode, please go and check it out before watching this video. Secondly, if you like this video and want to support the channel, please like, share, and comment, as well as subscribing to my channel. We open this episode with Sam leaping in just before he's about to ring a doorbell. He speculates that perhaps he's on a date, but when a woman opens the door, played by Terry Austin, she seems less than excited to see him. Well, that ruins his mood, because it's definitely not a date. In a little bit, Sam's going to find himself getting shot at, and I don't know how many dates of yours end in getting shot. Well, actually, as far as I know, that could be your thing. But from the looks of things, it's not Sam Beckett's thing. I can't recall too many episodes of Quantum Leap that start with Sam immediately getting shot at and almost killed. At least not up to this point in the series. The worst Sam has experienced up until this point is getting embarrassed by not knowing the words to some religious ceremony that he's supposed to be performing. These are much higher stakes than the usual. Terry Austin, who plays our resident damsel in distress for this episode, plays Dana, and she has 41 other acting credits, including the movie Raising Cain, an episode of Diagnosis Murder, and an episode of Rewatch. She hasn't had any appearances in anything since 2001, which was the movie Gangland. Right off the bat, Sam and Dana establish an antagonistic relationship, and Quantum Leap likes to do this at least a few times throughout the series, where they have an antagonistic relationship between Sam and some other girl, and that signifies love. When we come back from the credits, things are not looking good for Sam Beckett, but I have this funny feeling that he's going to get out of this situation alive. Could have something to do with the fact that there's still 70-something episodes in the series. Sam manages to pull a fancy maneuver with his car, and he gets away from his would-be murderers. Dana is not super impressed with their narrow victory. Back at the FBI building, which Sam apparently is, he's apparently on protection duty, we find Sam in what I believe is his office, when Al should appear at the 6-minute and 42-second mark. Sam is none too pleased by the fact that Al does not appear in the mirror, and Al points out he doesn't reflect in mirrors because he's a hologram. Sam is basically there because a mobster, played by John Snyder, wants to kill Dana. John Snyder looks really familiar to me, but when I looked through his Internet Movie Database page, I only saw the movie Eraser, an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, that I would have seen. These days, he seems to be doing mostly voice work for anime movies. He has 132 credits to his name. At any rate, Sam's mission seems clear. Prevent Dana from becoming dead. We cut to a scene of what appears to be Sam's boss and Dana, who's grousing about the fact that the federal prosecutors promised that Nick would be put away, but apparently he was found innocent, and now Dana is in serious trouble. Sam's boss is played by Stanley Brock, who was in the movie Hard to Kill, had an appearance on Charles in Charge, and 4 appearances on Night Court. He died on January 25th, 1991, at the age of 59. We gather during the course of this scene that Dana is not thrilled with Sam's efforts to protect her, but his boss tells her that he is the best that there is. Well, maybe the guy he replaced is the best that there is, but not Sam Beckett himself. Dana ends up going to Sam's office, where they engage in their antagonistic repartee. Dana ends up refusing to go anywhere with Sam, but his boss says, well, then you are on your own, and that convinces her to go along with Sam Beckett. Probably a good call, because despite appearances, Sam Beckett is batting 1,000. We have a brief scene with the guy that wants to kill Dana, Nick, and his associate, played by Renee Aza, who has 31 credits to his name, including a 3-episode stint on Baywatch. I'm kind of wondering if he crossed paths with Terry Austin when he was there. The movie Deep Cover, and 3 episodes of DEA. He died on March 10th, 2002 at the age of 57. What is with people in this episode dying at a young age? Anyway, Nick's associate does not get anywhere trying to convince Nick not to continue pursuing Dana. We have a scene with Sam, his boss, and Al chirping in the background. Sam is seemingly ignoring Al as he's going on and on. Now, what's funny about this is me and my regular viewer, Mark Davidson, were talking about this recently. The fact that people, when they act with Dean Stockwell in this series, have to pretend like Dean Stockwell isn't there. And this, with Dean behind the two of them, these two actors, constantly talking, has to be probably the hardest version of this. Scott Bakula, who plays Sam Beckett, obviously, is aware of Al's existence, but Stanley Brock not so much, or he's not supposed to be. But Sam is ignoring Al so he can get information out of his boss, which is something that Al should know. So, minus points for him in this scene. The plan is for Sam to take Dana to Baltimore in a laundry truck, but both Sam and Al are worried because that's where Dana ends up dying, in Baltimore, or on the way to Baltimore, I should say. His boss tells him, hey, we're the only two that know where she's going, so if something happens and they get tipped off, there's only 2 people who possibly could know. And Brock acts this scene like he's guilty, like he's the mole. So much so that I think this convinces Sam that Al is right. He definitely has to change the plan. But he's not going to tell his boss this, because he doesn't really trust his boss. Sam's Swiss cheese memory remembers a cabin near the Berkshires that was really nice, and he gets it in his head that perhaps, maybe, he should take Dana there. Al ends up asking if back in the day he ever took someone up there to engage in extracurricular activities. And what's really funny here is that Al uses a phrase that I often use as a euphemism for sex. And mainly I do that because occasionally I have a 9-year-old who watches my videos. But I think I'm somewhat safe here, as I doubt my 9-year-old is watching my Quantum Leap videos. But you never do know. It's quite possible that I got this euphemism from Al himself during the course of this episode. So this could be like a full circle moment for me right here. The cabin also happens to be special to Sam because he and Professor Del Negro used to go there to talk about quantum physics, and indeed, potentially develop the string theory there. But that doesn't matter anymore because he explained the entire theory to his future wife Donna, who is now credited with Quantum Leap, of course, as seen in the episode Star-Crossed, which I say partially in jest. Sam and Dana are departing the FBI to go to Baltimore, or not, because Sam has changed the plan. But wouldn't you know it, Sam and Dana are being followed by people with less than stellar intentions. We have a brief scene where it seems that Sam has not checked in like he was supposed to, and his boss is worried. Or is he? He does seem to be legitimately concerned about Sam's well-being. We cut back to Sam and Dana has caught on to the fact that Sam is not taking her to where he was supposed to, and he says that he's changed the plan, which she is not thrilled with at all. Meanwhile, the gangstas who are following behind realize that they are not going to Baltimore themselves and decide to take this moment to run Sam off the road and try to kill Dana right here and then. To get away, Dana goes back to the back of the laundry truck and starts chucking laundry bags out of the vehicle, causing Nick and co. to crash. But I have to say that before she starts throwing those bags out the door, she leaves herself a very tempting target for way too long. I am not sure that this was the best plan, even if it ended up working out. We soon discover that Nick and his associate have a tracking device in the laundry truck. So that's how they're doing it. Late at night, Sam and Dana are driving, and they start to bond. Dana ends up expressing irritation at the fact that everybody, up until this point, seems to act like Dana is some kind of criminal, up until including Sam, before this day, before he leaped in and was a completely different person. Sam ends up apologizing for that, and they seem to be bonding, so they can fall in love. They finally get to the cabin, and Sam and Dana almost kiss. Well, that was a close one. Sam almost got cooties there from kissing a girl. Inside the cabin, Sam is trying to start a fire. He notices a matchbook with a number. Meanwhile, Dana is complaining in the background, which is pretty on brand for herself so far this episode. Al appears to make fun of Sam for not completing his pass, because he didn't end up kissing Dana. Sam ends up asking, "Why haven't I leaped yet?" And Al says, "Well, that's simple. You didn't save her yet." "What do you mean?" Sam says. "The deadline passed hours ago." "Well, clearly, Sam, you're still in danger somehow." Al ends up telling her that each time that Sam ends up saving Dana somehow, the time and place of her death just changes. It's almost like fate is unavoidable, or perhaps there's something else at play here, like a tracking device? Al ends up exiting the scene, using the door, in the one and only time that the door effect is seen in this episode, according to Al's place. Sam makes the decision to leave the cabin because they are not safe there. But Dana is unconvinced of this course of action. Sam is going to go get the vehicle, and then Dana is going to run out. And Dana says, "Well, this is how the girl dies in all the horror movies." You know, you have a point there, but Sam doesn't seem to think so. But there's just one problem with Sam's plan. The car won't start. And after some careful investigation, yep, there isn't any gas in it. Where's Billy Bob Thornton when you need him? The gas gauge, which says they have all this gas, is actually broken. Good one, Sam. The lake that we see in this episode during the course of this scene actually reminds me of the lake that we saw in Permanent Wave, which is a Season 3 episode coming up. It's probably a reused set. I don't think it's the same place. I don't think Sam ended up taking the people in that episode to the same cabin. But I guess we'll see when we rewatch that episode. Dana ends up throwing the gun, Sam's gun, at Sam, and he bobbles it and ends up in the lake. And Dana is all annoyed, but really, that was a bad throw. Who could catch that throw? Dana's NFL career is definitely not off to a good start. Inside the cabin, all Sam is wearing is a towel, as Dana ends up looking through photos, one of which happens to be of Sam himself and Professor Del Negro. Dana ends up commenting that the person in the picture has kind eyes and is the type of person that she could fall in love with. Sam ends up fishing to see who she's talking about and asks, the professor or the student? Dana doesn't end up answering the question, saying, it doesn't matter because she's gonna die anyway. Sam tries to reassure her, but she is not at all convinced. Dana and Sam end up kissing, making out, and I guess Sam is gonna get cooties after all. But during their necking session, Dana notices the matchbook sitting nearby and the phone number, and she reacts by grabbing Sam's gun, confusing the heck out of Sam Beckett. Dana ends up running out of the building, leaving a mostly naked Sam Beckett behind, which is when Al appears. And he makes a joke that I probably would have made, but he says it first. He says something along the lines of, he can honestly say that he's never had a girl try to shoot him just for making a pass. Sam claims that he did not make a pass, but then thinks better what he's saying, and says that he sort of did, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like what, Sam? Al asks the same question, but Sam really doesn't answer it, most likely because he doesn't have one. Sam has an idea. He wonders what happened to Pete when Dana ended up dead, and the answer is nothing. In neither case was Pete, the person that Sam replaced, touched. Because Pete was working for Nick. He runs off to try and find Dana to save her life. Dana, meanwhile, runs into Nick, who's driving, and that is just really bad luck for Dana. Nick goes to the sunroof and has an Uzi in hand. Well, that seems like overkill, but he takes his sweet time saying, hey, not too quickly. You know, this is how the bad guys always lose. If you just shoot her right here and then, episode over. Nick does end up shooting her in the shoulder, which with an Uzi should probably do a lot more damage. But okay, maybe Dana is actually part of the Avengers and we just don't know it. Sam ends up finding Dana after a brief chase, but Dana is not convinced that Sam is on her side, so she ends up hitting him over the head with a branch. Or a log. It's more like a log. A branch would, not really do that much damage, so that would not do her any good. So yes, it's more like a big log. She ends up running to the edge of a cliff. Once again, Dana, this is some pretty serious bad luck you got going on here. Sam finds her, and Dana screams. Well, this is some serious, not very good survival skills that you got going on here, Dana. You gave away your location, which is how Nick and his associate end up finding them. Dana threatens to jump, but then realizes that's exactly what these people want, for her to jump and die. Sam tries to convince her that he is still on her side. Sam tells her that he is not going to shoot her, but Pete might, which is a pretty confusing statement. He tells her that he is not Pete, and that he has an invisible friend Al, and that the people that are coming to kill her are coming, and she needs him, or rather, he needs her, to trust him. As soon as Nick comes out of the clearing, Sam ends up pulling a gun on Dana. Nick ends up asking, "Hey, why'd you try to escape from me?" And Sam claims, "I didn't know it was you. I thought my boss had put a tail on me, and I was trying to lose him." His associate says, "Well, that makes sense." But Nick isn't as convinced. Nick thinks that Sam has fallen in love, and that's why Nick, or rather Sam, is protecting Dana. Al, meanwhile, is insisting that Sam shoot Nick. And eventually, as Nick raises his arms to kill Dana, Sam ends up pushing Dana aside and shoots Nick a bunch of times. And just like that, Nick is dead. His associate cries over him and says, "Why didn't you just drop this? Why didn't you just walk away?" He grabs Nick's body, looks at Sam, and then walks off into the woods. Back at the cabin, Sam is insisting that Dana hold a gun on him, and she's really confused. He keeps saying that the real Pete will return, and he will have less than honorable intentions. She thinks he's nuts. He says he's probably going to go away to jail for a long time. She says that he deserves a medal, but what Al says he gets is 8 to 10. Interrupting the scene is Professor Del Negro himself. Before Sam can tell him who he is, he leaps. And I gotta talk about this ending for a minute. Sam really does not take the proper precautions to make sure that Pete doesn't hurt anybody. Apparently, Professor Del Negro ends up marrying Dana after this incident, so this all works out. But Sam leaves way too much to chance here. What he should do is have himself handcuffed and tied up, so that when Pete returns, he's not a danger to this Professor Del Negro guy and Dana herself. Yes, he takes the precaution of having Dana hold a gun on him, but she's not convinced that Sam is even right about this. She's convinced he's crazy. So I really think that Sam should have taken the extra step to have him immobilized even more. Tied up, handcuffed, you name it. At any rate, this was a decent episode. The next time we meet, we will be talking about Season 2, Episode 16, Freedom, which I was never really a big fan of. In fact, I skipped it for a really long time after I saw it as a kid. So we shall see if my feelings towards the episode have changed. At any rate, that's all I got for you for this episode. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can join my Corman Productions Facebook page. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.